Hello, everyone, and welcome to Making Remote Work. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Greg Miller, the co-founder of Faethm. Greg, welcome to Making Remote Work.
Thanks, Ilya. It's really good to be here.
Greg, for starters, could you introduce yourself a bit more and tell us a bit about Faethm?
You bet. Look, I'm one of the founders of the business. We launched Faethm about 3.5 years ago now. It's been a pretty rapid run for us. We started the business really when we saw that if you were trying to solve big problems like the future of work, which sounds quite grandiose and overwhelming at times, or the fourth industrial revolution, you had really nowhere to go other than kind of a large, maybe strategic consultancies. It was quite expensive to try and work out the answers to what that future holds. We also saw that there were a host of reports on the topic, right? You could download a series of reports, all of which kind of had a different view of what that future was, which also kind of compounded, I think, the confusion around it. So we thought, hey, what if we built an AI platform, we provided data, and we could put specific data in the hands of business decision makers and government policymakers so they could actually move off of the kind of awareness about these topics and through to action. And that's really what our intent was. We wanted to keep the world's population employable, right? Help them skill for the future. And as we innovate, as technologies come into being, we're never going to stop that. We don't want to stop that. We want to stay competitive. But as we do that, people are going to be impacted. Jobs are going to be impacted, skills and tasks. So how do we make sure people are ready for that and give them a pathway to a stronger, brighter future?
So what kind of data do you use? Where do you collect it from? And how do you look at it?
Yeah, so the AI platform we built assesses kind of workforce data. Now, there's a lot of data already in Faethm that we've built out over the last 3.5 years, consuming entire census data sets, workforces in multiple countries around the world, consuming the entire ILO workforce data set, plus obviously a lot of our customers and what we're seeing in their data. But we combine that with our proprietary analytics and software and publicly available data. And then we play back to our clients new information, new insights, new data about these impacts from external forces, whether they be AI, robotics, or COVID-19. What are the impacts going to look like? How are they going to manifest themselves over time? And then that's really where the action starts, right? Now that we have those insights, the data, we can start turning them into action. I mentioned there's a lot of data already in Faethm. The occupation ontology we've built now has over 5,000 job families in it, basically covering every known job on the planet. Okay, we're not quite to the jobs on Mars yet, but every job on the planet we've got in Faethm. We've defined it across skills, knowledge, soft skills, context required to do the job, but also across every task. So every job task, what is it I do in my job? How do I spend my time? All of that underpins the platform, which I suppose on one hand means we need a lighter footprint of data from our clients. So it's really, when I say workforce data, that might sound daunting, but it's a simple set of data looking at the types of jobs in the workforce, where they work, what their compensation looks like, what their org structure looks like, even things like gender and age. Not to ever assess that with the AI. So things like gender and age never go into the AI, so there's no chance for bias to be created. It's really looking at the output. So I know where technology impact is going to manifest itself, and I can prepare for things like making sure my diversity and inclusion is maintained or is going in the right direction, that age groups in my workforce aren't materially impacted one way or another, or that I'm able to prepare different ethnicities within my workforce for this future state if they're at a higher or lower level of risk.
And I was quite impressed. I was listening to Mike talk about it and the kind of parallelisms you found between accounting and cybersecurity, and how those jobs can transition, or if that's one pathway for transitioning. Who's using this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think for most HR professionals, some of the insights from Faethm can be challenging, maybe new. Not many companies out there, I would suggest, at least the ones I've met and the kind of hundreds I've met over the last couple of years, have a career path that says, "Hey, accountant, we're going to turn you into a cybersecurity analyst." Yet, if you get rid of your biases that we all naturally kind of have and build over time, and we think about the people we know in those jobs or the job titles, and just put that aside, say, okay, well, what are the skills? What does it take to do the job? The analysis capabilities, the working with numbers, and the assessments that an accountant might have. Let's look at that cyber role. What do they need to do their job? And we start to actually do a complete skills gap analysis between any job that exists. But of course, we're looking for those with a proximity in skills, right? And if you look at soft skills needed for those jobs, some of the skills needed for those jobs, they're very well aligned. Where we see the divergence is mostly around the technology, as you can imagine, side of things. So that's where then we see the focus. So that's where learning and development professionals can come with a curriculum and say, all right, I can fill that gap. In fact, we have partners in our ecosystem now, both here in Australia, but also in the US, that are filling that gap from accountancy to cybersecurity in less than 6 months. Less than
Wow.
6 months. Think about that when you are out now trying to recruit cyber roles and you can't find them. You're a bank, you're a government. I mean, every organization, every industry is trying to recruit that role. And either they're too expensive or they literally can't find them because we can't produce them fast enough. So you would think, the natural response would be, well, let's look internally and see who's got a good enough skills match and then give them the curriculum they need. So, it's a real pathway and one of many that we kind of uncover and showcase as clients use the platform.
Yeah, for sure. Who are your customers? Is it more governments? Is it big companies?
Yeah, it's large enterprise. I mean, for us, that's everywhere from 1,000 employees to 400,000 employees. So it's quite a gamut in our current customer base. If I look at the most active kind of industries, I think government is probably number one, and maybe followed by financial insurance services, number two. And I can tell you, they're very different reasons why those two are kind of at the top. If we look at government, they are typically the biggest employer in any land. So they have the same issues to resolve and future to create that a bank does. But they've got a very large workforce and an incredibly diverse workforce. You have education and healthcare and police and finance. You have kind of everything that exists. So it is quite a challenge. Now, they've got to solve that for their own people, particularly at a time when most of us are expecting governments to digitize their services. So that requires the governments to have a different level of skill to do that. So how do they prepare what is sometimes a lower skilled overall workforce for that kind of digital future? So that's a challenge that all industries, I say, share. But government also has, the carriage of all of us, right? They have to think about this issue across every constituency. How do they write the right policy? How do they make sure the education system is ready to prepare every industry and every worker for this future? So a very active space for us with governments all over the world as they look at their own people, but also their marketplaces. And then, contrast that with banking, insurance, and financial services, where what we see is they're automating faster than any other industry. Therefore, they're very attuned to the people impacts. As they roll out those automation strategies, those automation technologies, and they're transforming their workforce, what's happening to those people? How do they find the right transition pathways? And we talked about accountancy. Well, look, that's a pretty high skilled function, right? We can apply those accountants in many directions. But if we start talking about, insurance clerks or tellers, not quite as skilled as an accountant, what's the right pathway for them? It's probably not cybersecurity. And in fact, in a lot of those cases, it's not in their own industry. Those lower skilled jobs we find are going to have to find the right pathway outside of, in that case, financial services, and potentially into another industry. Oftentimes what we find in Faethm when we're looking at the financial services industry, it's actually healthcare is a viable pathway. The lower skilled jobs in, say, home healthcare aides, I can get a certificate to have that job pretty quickly, and it requires some level of people skills, if you will. So that industry is booming, right? So at a time when thousands of people are being made redundant in banking as automation strategies come in, we have to find other industries that need those skills, find the skills maps, and get them the reskilling programs, either through companies or outplacement or from the government.
This show is about remote work, and I know you've done some studies on this. So let's start talking about this. And I don't want to forget about the future of work and how different jobs will move and become something else, either through automation or augmentation. But just to focus a bit the discussion right now, tell me about the MIT study that you've conducted, and what were the results?
You bet, yeah. And interestingly, I find these two issues you just raised, future of work and how the roles are transitioning, and now COVID-19 and how we look at things like business resilience, I find they're actually coming together. So it's incredibly relevant, I think, to bring them together eventually. But yeah, with MIT, it's a really interesting piece of work we did with them. And they've kind of been out on the forefront of this thinking for some time now. We were approached by them to do a piece of work looking at something specific to COVID. Now, we had just released literally new data science in the platform about that time. One of the things we did, I think it was about February, was kind of say to our data science team, hey, stop everything you're doing. And these are some pretty smart folks, right? And it's kind of the lifeblood for a company like Faethm. So we said, what could you do to support our clients in this kind of reshaping and planning of the future workforce related to the pandemic? And to their credit, they responded. And we've built an entirely new piece of AI, a new neural network that's now live in Faethm. And so when MIT approached, we said, hey, perfect timing. Why don't we apply it to the entire US workforce? And so we took the entire US census, we refreshed it to the end of 2019 with some data modeling, and then we implemented that into Faethm and ultimately assessed the entire US workforce across every industry, every worker, every state, to give us a view as to what's likely to happen to this workforce. How do we prepare it for that future state? So yeah, really, really excited by that. And it's, I'd say, just the beginning as we can start to peel back that data now and dig a little deeper, because we kind of went fairly high level to get some initial thinking out there. But yeah, excited about what that can do.
It's quite impressive, right? And if you allow me, when we post this, and I can share the study as well, there were 3.2% or something like this of the American workforce working remote, and during the pandemic, it shifted to about 80%. And what I really liked is that you were looking into those critical jobs that either required or not human interaction, and that were also prone to augmentation and automation. Can you give a bit more details on the findings and maybe how to interpret them from an economical perspective or technological perspective or even individual perspective?
You bet. Yeah, I think maybe first to just say, well, what is that neural net doing? So how are we assessing the workforce in this lens? So the first thing that the neural net does is it looks at every job for a degree of task promotability within that job. So every job, as I was talking about before, we've defined across the workforce, and we have a view and a weighting of what those tasks are, how important those tasks are to a job. So now we can say, all right, what's the degree of remotability of those tasks? And also look at the degree of human interactivity. So it allows us to start plotting the impact kind of rating for any job and every job and all industries as well, as we're looking at, all right, is that job easy to do the tasks in a remote fashion? Do they interact with other humans at a high degree or low degree? And then provide kind of a risk rating. And that's, of course, leading to different interventions, if you will. So that was kind of step one. So then we started looking at, all right, once we know the plotting, we can start seeing and overlaying things like technology impacts and augmentation and automation as we start looking at those interventions into the future. But if you take the category of, say, high risk or high impact, I should say, jobs within that assessment, you're going to find what a lot of healthcare, nurses, for example, policing, education, jobs that need to be out there. They're interacting with the public and other humans at a high degree. Very difficult to do that job remote. Okay, so that group in isolation, we start looking at, all right, what are the interventions there? Is it, PPE gear? Is it in
Working in
kind of
social
implementing
distancing.
technologies that maybe augment them to de-risk them? Okay, we even did things like looking at, all right, well, what if we overlay then an age grouping on that group? Now suddenly we look at older age workers in a high impact rating. That's a group, for safety reasons, we really need to think about, hey, where could we reskill them into other parts of the workforce to de-risk them and move younger workers into those higher risk jobs, at least for the short term, because we can't have that kind of risk to life and limb in that time. So, some really interesting things. Now, we can look at the other end of the spectrum and say, well, what about jobs that easy to remote? I mean, you mentioned the numbers, how many kind of organizations were remoting their workforces. A lot of those workforces was in a jerk reaction. Quick, everyone, you're going home. Oh no, I forgot. 20% of my workforce doesn't have laptops. Now what do I do? So just because I sent everyone home does not by any means mean we're productive. We're able to contribute. We're able to meet the challenges of our clients. So assessing that task remotability is only one factor. I think when we look at that group of jobs that are in the low impact, that's becoming a discussion now and a use case to say, all right, how are we reshaping the workplace, not just the workforce itself? Because if 70% of my workforce has a high degree of task remotability, low degree of human interactivity, do they ever need to go back to the way it was, or ever go back to the office I have in downtown? Look, probably not. I think what we're seeing of those numbers is we're kind of dividing up that group. There's a subset within that group that can be just as productive at home. They're going to stay home probably the rest of their jobs in that organization, or lives in that, careers in that organization. Those that are, yes, we can remote the task, but we've left 20 or 30% of that job back at the office. That means they're not being productive. So we either reshape the tasks within the job and move that job, or we think what we're seeing now, a lot of our clients, is a kind of a hybrid in terms of workplace. So 2-3 days a week, yep, they're going to go into the office. Guess what? Office looks nothing like it did before. It's a collaborative space. You're going to meet with your teams. It's not a desk. You will never have a desk. Right? So I think that's what we're seeing now with that other end of the spectrum. And then, of course, we've got other interventions in between. Some can be fixed with things like Zoom, but not everything. I might be able to teach my class over Zoom, but can I grade the class? Can they take the test? Those kind of things. So there might be a heightened degree of technology needed in those situations.
Did you get any new insights into the evolution or the future of work while you did the study on COVID? It was a pretty unique situation. And I was wondering if there were any takeaways that you could use for the usual Faethm research, not the COVID or pandemic related research.
You bet. I mean, I have to say, there's been a bit of self introspection as well, right? We looked at how we as a company responded and what we were going to do differently. I think it opened our eyes to how we can apply data science to other potential factors and forces that are external to a corporation or a market impacting work, and so how we can prepare that workforce. So once we started looking at things like AI and then looked at robotics and now at COVID, there will be more of those to come. So I think it's opened our eyes to that ability and need. But specific to the organizations we work with, the markets we're working in, we've definitely seen an advancement, an advancement of some of it reskilling and redeployment activities. Now, maybe those were in the HR plan or the strategic plan already, but they were kind of, not the top priority. So they kind of got funded, kind of got a little attention. Now those are popping to the top. What's driving that? I mean, if I can't recruit, if I'm having difficulty going out in the market recruiting, I have to look internally. I have to look at my existing assets and how I can reskill and repurpose and re-enable the organization. We're also seeing, I touched on this a bit, we're also seeing the automation strategy change. So whilst this, fourth industrial revolution, as it's referred to, what we like to think of as more the third renaissance, right? When have we had such an opportunity with technology to free people up to enjoy work and the work
Life.
experience, right? Never before, but potentially to this degree and with such speed. So what we're seeing is a reshaping. Now, not just looking at, hey, what can I automate to cut cost? But now looking at, all right, my automation strategy, maybe we should be driven by a human element. That could be jobs that, I have at risk in a pandemic, and I want to de-risk. Well, what technologies can help me do that? And again, not necessarily just Zoom or other video technologies, but how can I replace some of the tasks in a job and enable them to do other tasks, maybe more enjoyable tasks, maybe less risky tasks. So I think that automation strategy itself has been reshaped by the pandemic. And some of that's carrying then funding, but also targeting, which jobs or functions do we focus on first? And that may be very different than where we were 3-6 months ago.
Oh, for sure. And this goes into the positive way of thinking, right? It's not only cost, but it's also about people and reskilling them, making sure they can transition inside a company and have a future with the company. So it's kind of positive. What do you think will be, because you work in AI and you were just talking about how you have found new ways of using your platform, what do you think will be the AI prevalence post-COVID, post the pandemic? How else can it be used?
Wow, that's a expansive question there. I might just kind of keep that in the bounds of Faethm, but look, I think, as I said, an acceleration of the implementation of these technologies without doubt. So, we talk about it as this slingshot to 2023. We suddenly are leapfrogging forward, and some of that is the commitment of funding to do it that may have been held back. Some of that was a concern about automation's impact on people. Now it's actually the impact on people driving the automation, if that makes sense, because COVID-19 has put us in a whole new paradigm. And as we see jobs at different levels of risk based on the work they're doing, how can technology actually aid that and produce a less risky outcome for us? So yes, I absolutely seeing it firsthand right now. This rethinking of the strategy, but also the approval and investment in funding in this regard. So that acceleration of all types of technologies, emerging technologies, particularly AI and robotics, we are seeing and we will continue to see, in our view, to accelerate. Our own, applications of AI. We already had a handful of digital employees, right? We were one of those companies that had the ability to say, hey, to everyone in the workforce, what's that thing you hate doing? All right, what just drives you mad? If you get rid of it, and everyone gave us their list, and we actually started building bots to take away those tasks. We gave them names, and they've become employees of Faethm. So, what a great outcome for productivity, but also for the enjoyment of work. Again, I think we talk about reshaping the workforce, and that's about skills and preparing for the future. We talk about reshaping the workplace, and where we work, how we get there. But I think there's an interesting thing we're now exploring, which is how you reshape the human experience of work. And again, that's not all just danger, but some of that is removing monotony. My co-founder Michael's famous for saying that robots or technology are terrible at the things humans find natural, right? So, empathy, humor, creativity. We need to flourish in that space, whether you call those future capabilities or truly human capabilities. That's, I think, where we have an opportunity to kind of let that really grow and promote. And that's what are the future capabilities, right? That creates that future for us.
And how about for those that will be displaced? Will there be jobs in which people cannot reskill or upskill? And I'm thinking of cashiers. No one seems to have found a good job for cashiers, and they definitely stand a chance of automation and not augmentation. And there might be other jobs as well, like drivers also. Do you think that there will be such a situation in which some people will not be able to reskill?
I think it's not an ultimatum. There's no job, I think, that will never be reskilled. I think it's just a longer road, a longer reskilling journey, and probably has to start earlier. And that's part of the reason we're trying to provide the data to support those decisions, right? Now, that's probably excluding the human condition, I suppose, in some regard, because if I don't have a growth mindset and I don't want to transform myself and I don't take action, well, then yes, I will be stuck. But if I have some proclivity to try and advance myself and stay employed, then yes, there is a path for everyone. And those cashiers, it's interesting because that job, comes out of the MIT work we did, right? So that's sitting in that high impact category. And it's an essential worker as well, right? Doesn't matter level of pandemic. Guess what stayed open, right? We needed to go get, groceries. So cashiers and the safety of cashiers became paramount. So you've got a high risk in pandemic. You have a high potential automation. We've all gone to the outlets that have chosen to bring in cashierless environments, and I think we're just seeing the first wave of that, but that will accelerate now on the back of COVID, I suspect. So now we need to look at those lower skill jobs and say, right, what is the logical pathway or the right pathway if we let the data drive us? And I can tell you it's unlikely to be in their existing industries. Part of that is because of the makeup of those industries. Part of that is because of the volume of people in these low skilled jobs. There are a lot of retail sales clerks. There are a lot of cashiers. There are a lot of drivers, right? So big numbers. We can never absorb them in their existing industries. We're going to have to transition them to other industries and absorb them across the entire market. Now, I also want to point out, I think there's often a missed element of the future of work. And, we've stopped talking about it in that light. I know most people it resonates, they get it, so I'll still use the words, but we think of this as the evolution of work. Right? It is not future and too daunting for me to get started. It is yesterday. Okay? And it's continuing, but it's evolution. It's little steps we can take right now. It's not too big, and it's also not the next CEO's problem to fix, not the next minister or senator's problem to fix, right? This is now. It's an evolution. So I think if you bring that context, then you have to not just look at automation. And you mentioned augmentation, jobs that are impacted but stay in the workforce and need to be upskilled. But you must also look at what we refer to as addition. Okay, we all know there's new industries forming on the back of these technologies, but there are also new jobs in every organization needed related to the implementation, running, and maintenance of these technologies. And they're not all deep technical roles as well. There's a variety of types of work, but that addition is critical because those become target jobs, right? That's a destination for those jobs at risk. I mean, these cashiers and drivers that we're talking about, those new jobs that are being added to the workforce, that's a destination we want to get them to. Now, maybe we can't get them there in 6 months, but if we look at this as a 2 or 3 year horizon, absolutely, absolutely.
We mentioned cybersecurity, right, as a new industry that's booming. Are there other industries that you can mention which are growing right now and where people can maybe shift their direction towards?
Well, when we think of jobs, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of technology-related jobs on the back of the impact of emerging tech. So that's probably no surprise. And things like cyber, things like data science are usually at the top of everyone's list. Even those who don't have them today have them on their list and are thinking they need them. And they're right, by the way. But they're not quite sure how to get them. So again, it comes back to looking both internally but also externally, and maybe looking at other industries as to where we find them. But I think the technology again drives a host of different types of work that's needed. If we look at a bank that's accelerating into this future, yes, they might be replacing people, but they're also needing to add cyber and data analysts and data science, also things like change analysts, right? What is the change, the transformation I'm going through as a company? That change analyst role is less technical, much needed, and is a potential viable pathway for some of those folks finding themselves displaced. So we don't always have to think, we've all been to the conference and had the futurist on stage talking about the drone hive operator, right? Or whatever other thing they dream up. We're more rooted in the
reality.
Actual jobs. We don't put a job in Faethm unless we know one of them exists somewhere. Okay. Now, for many of our clients, they have no idea what that job is, but we know it exists. Someday they're going to probably need one. So if we're rooted in that reality, this is not a futuristic transformation. As you say, it's cashiers now. It's accountants now. So where do they go in the next 12, 24 months? Well, those are jobs that exist today, either in their workforce or in another industry. It's just about providing the data to the people making these decisions so they actually can kind of open their eyes, remove the blinders, and see outside of their kind of their bias.
And this is one of the reasons why I was asking you, because, I like the transition of the word as well from the future to evolution. It does reflect better on what's happening, and it's indeed less fearsome. And that's one of the reasons why I also like Faethm, because whenever I read any of your articles or any of your research, there is a clear pathway. It's not just fear, hey, we're being automated or augmented and we will be without jobs. Learn how to, get a hobby and live a life without meaning and without work. It's like, no, actually, we can move this to this. These are the skills that are needed. All we need to learn is this. It seems like a simple pathway.
It seems that way, right? It sounds somewhat logical.
It's actionable.
Makes sense. But I think the reality is a lot of the times this falls on an HR team that has a set of processes and infrastructure that have the way we've been doing things for decades. And so I think when we speak about this topic, we often speak about HR in particular being at the center of this and having to unlearn maybe decades of practice and process, which is a very difficult thing to do, let's face it. But I have to unlearn the way I budget my learning and development spend, right? And how I spend it. So let's stay with our happy accountant. Traditionally, I'm going to give you training to make you better at your job, maybe get you ready to be a controller or a CFO. I don't know, as you move up the path. And I think, that path is gone. But most organizations would still have that kind of trajectory. So how do I unlearn that? How do I unlearn the L&D side of that, or even the recruiting side of that? Because I'm probably still recruiting accountants with the same job profile I've had for the last 5 years, maybe more, at a time when my CIO is rolling out technologies that are going to impact them. Maybe we should rethink even what we're recruiting for, so they're ready for the transition when it happens. But that, yeah, like I said, that's not easy to do. I recognize that, and I think that's why we try and take this in bite-sized chunks. Right? Get our thinking about this is an evolution over time. Let's start somewhere. Where do we start? Well, let's start by having the data support the decision. Whether you're using Faethm's data or someone else's, that's fine. But let's get that as our kind of one of our foundations, if you will, so we can start to make the right decisions and help our workforce transition.
Greg, how it's very hard to find data on Faethm. I know about you, and I'm having hard time sometimes to find the research, and I know what keywords to use and all of that. How can we make this more available to HRs so you can get the right support in the lobbying that you're doing to talk about the evolution of work, and how can this be done step by step?
Ilya, I'm doing my best.
I know.
You sound like my board. No. Yeah, look, we are.
I really like what you're doing. I really think it's incredibly important, and it finally sheds light on things that we've been asking and questioning for a long time, and no one has been doing anything, or doing very, very little with very little effect. And now that we have the data, I would just love to bring it out there.
Yeah, well, look, obviously, even moments like this, go a long way to help us in that mission of ours. But here's how we're approaching. We're a startup from Sydney, Australia, but we're kind of supported by, believed in by the likes of the World Economic Forum. We're part of their Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The likes of MIT that you referenced, Gartner. So we've had some really powerful folks come out and say, hey, if you're doing anything in this space, you need to be looking at that. So that's been absolutely monumental for a company like us. Now, in addition, our growth plans are pretty significant, as you might imagine. In about 2 years, we've kind of hit our 100th client. So it's been a rapid run for us, but it's early days. But we're actively growing we've got our first team in Europe based out of London. We got our first team in the US based out of San Francisco. So we're growing into other markets, but we're also building a significant ecosystem of partners. So we believe that the data, the insights that Faethm's technology platform provides is part of the answer. But oftentimes, organizations also need some support in taking that data, turning it into action. These are big transformation programs. We're talking about reskilling efforts. So our ecosystem of partners is quite significant, and it spans strategic consultancies, human resources consultancies, technology consultancies, big and small, out taking the Faethm message, but also the platform to their clients. So that's been our approach, and we'll continue doing more of that, and look forward to continuing the conversation, because part of this is changing the dialogue, as you suggest.
Yeah, and I know you've just started, but definitely, at least for my I would like to see you more out there. Again, it's really interesting what you're doing. Just to finish up on the remote subject that we started with, how do you see, from where you stand, the future of remote and the future of research in remote, especially using AI?
Look, I think we'll continue to see the acceleration. I think the world, given that everyone is facing this and impacted in some level by this pandemic, that's going to change the way we behave and the way we look at things like our people, look at things like our automation strategies, et cetera. So I don't think that's going to go away. And I think the reality of preparing ourselves for the next time this happens, we have to consider that, right? And so simply going back to the same way we worked and places we worked and the shape of jobs isn't going to fly in that kind of a future. So the next time this were to happen, if we had a workforce that was prepared for this technologically, but also with skilling programs, then this doesn't become the shutdown that it has become. And we'll continue to provide all the data we can to support that. I mean, Faethm's vision of keeping the world's workers employable doesn't stop there. I mean, we apply Faethm in the education space as well, so that we make sure we're building the right curriculum. We apply Faethm even in the kind of investor space, how we make investment decisions based on how companies are treating automation. Are you automating responsibly? We think that should be something companies are judged on. We can't simply pass the buck, as it were, on to those who have been automated to try and figure this out and absorb it. Corporates, governments, and individuals all have a role to play into preparing for that future.
Greg, thank you so much for doing this at this late hour, and do enjoy your dinner.
No, it's great to meet you and interact, and I appreciated the time.
I appreciate it as well very much. Thanks a lot.
Right, you bet. Take care.